This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins today's show with this week's grain market outlook. He discusses how the drought has impacted crops across the country. Continuing the show is K-State Swine Extension Specialist Joel DeRouchey with information about feeding sows to meet their nutrient requirements. Swine have different ration requirements depending on their stage of life. Kansas State University meteorologist Chip Redmond finishes the show with a report on the recent hot weather. He also shares what people can expect looking into the future. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show as we normally do with some grain market information. And as always, we're joined by K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
So, talking about the grain market, starting our conversation as we normally do with what are futures looking like?
Well, futures are beset by issues both domestically in the U.S. and some issues overseas as well. Domestically, the dry weather has caught the attention of the markets, but they're struggling to quantify the actual impact of it. When you look at corn futures closing yesterday, again, August the 24th, Thursday, you saw the lead futures, September, which is just about to enter into its delivery period in the next week or so, 472 and a quarter, and then D's 488 and a quarter. Both those were down about 2 to 4 cents. But you have the following December at 508, it was actually up a penny. So you don't have a lot of carry in those markets, and we're actually kind of waiting for watching information from the different crop tours that are occurring. Some troublesome aspects of that, but overall, when you have these corn still sitting at about 488, we haven't digested or taken in any hard data yet that would suggest what the USDA projected the last time out for U.S. corn yields of 175.1 is going to change much. Although we might talk about it later, there are some questions on the horizon. I look at soybeans. Of course, the heat that's come in here in essence since the USDA August 11th crop production and WASDE reports, which is measuring crop conditions as about August 1st. We've had since that time support in the markets. You saw September yesterday closed at 1365. November also above it at 1371 3/4. Both those up. Well, September up about 6. November new crops kind of where our attention is turning to up about 11, and most of the other contracts after that also up at 10, 11, 12 cents. Wheat's been struggling, and you've got the September contract 753. This is the Kansas hardwood winter wheat contract. Closed at 753 on Thursday the 24th. The D's contract also moving higher than that, up to 762 and a half. Both those were down 1 or 2 cents, et cetera. Not a lot of supply-demand info right now, and not a lot of crop production in the field info affecting wheat, other than wondering about what farmers will do with the October winter wheat planting coming up in Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma and those areas. But anyway, the point being that right now we're really more homing in on, at least for the Kansas contract, the usage side of things. A little bit better export pace in the last week or so for hardwood winter wheat, but still just been lagging. And that's a polite word for what's been going on in terms of U.S. wheat exports. Some wheat reported to be coming into the country from overseas, Europe in particular, and that's been a damper on the market.
And what are cash prices looking like across Kansas?
The cash prices for corn, most of those are running, lowest cash price in the area, these 6 areas that we watch in different parts of the state. Southeast area around Columbus, about 474 for the high. On the high end, Garden City, of course, demand center for the state, 567 for corn, up 95 cents over. Most other places, again, the farther out to the west you go, a little better price. Colby area, top price, 532.60 over. And Salina, 476. Topeka, 517. Hutchinson, 522. So we've got a variety of things. Really, when I look at the corn price, I look at new crop bids. what does stand out is, and has been for the last couple of weeks, has been how new crop bids for grain sorghum in a number of these areas have been competitive with and sometimes higher than new crop bids, equal to or higher than new crop bids for corn. So, they're competitive feed grains. Kind of the season when Chinese interest for buying grain sorghum has stepped up quite a fair amount. It had a decent pace in the last bit of time. So as long as that holds up, you see some pretty good bids for grain sorghum. Hutchinson area, again, export demand center, you got the top new crop bid for sorghum at $4.98, for corn at $4.88. So again, that's higher and indicative of expectations of pretty strong movement to come harvest time. You've got, particularly in Salina, $4.96 for new crop bid for grain sorghum, $4.71 for corn. So again, export center Salina, Hutchinson, showing that. Topeka, basically you've got corn and sorghum new crop bids just about equal. So it is as it is. You have variability around the state in soybean bids. Highest one over $14. You got a bid in Topeka as a spot bid. Salina $13.86, $14.26 in Hutchinson also. So some areas of strong bids, and we're not so strong. We're getting farther out to the western part of the state. Again, Colby $13.20, $13.87 for garden, and it is as is for wheat, which again we just had our wheat harvest, and if anything, we're now kind of looking towards what the market may offer for new crop bids for 2024. You have the strongest bids for 24 in Topeka at 727, 712 in both Hutchinson and Salina, and again at 702 Garden City, 692 Colby, 696 in Columbus. And really, Shelby, the number that most of those farmers are probably watching is the crop insurance planning price. And the last number I'd seen on that in the last day or so was around $7.40, and that's not a bad price at all. However, a year ago we were about $1.30 or $1.40 higher than that, about $8.70, $8.80. So that doesn't give as much incentive for planting wheat. Although I think farmers' decisions are probably still going to be dependent largely on how much moisture they have and what their crop rotation is. So interesting things to watch for sure.
And as we talk about the state of Kansas this past week, we've experienced a lot of hot weather, but not a lot of rain. So are we seeing some impacts with our crops with that?
We and Kansas isn't alone. You're seeing that across the country. Really, probably the most concern right now would be on the soybean side. And you see the percent of agriculture of soybean production in the United States in drought is 38%. And for sunflowers, we don't have as much of that, but another oilseed about 11% in drought. I would say for corn, we've got in the U.S. about 43% of the U.S. corn crop in drought as defined by the U.S. Drought Monitor, and sorghum about 61%. Of course, you're focusing more on Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma, some areas that have been dealing with dry conditions. So I guess, how do we figure out what the impacts of these issues are? I think the hot spot, and use that to talk about market activity, is probably also hot temperature-wise. Iowa, southern Minnesota, parts of South Dakota, Nebraska. You've got those states, particularly Nebraska, 75% of their cropland showing some type of drought impact. You go to Iowa, and you've got 78%. Wisconsin, 78%. Louisiana, farther south, 64%. Texas, 56%. Missouri, 62%. Again, you've got all manner of things going on. Illinois is not really showing as much drought, only about 17%. So I think these are things that we're wrestling with right now. That's for corn. As I mentioned earlier, the crop we're most concerned about on a major scale would be soybeans. And Nebraska, 85% of soybean acres in some type of drought impact. Kansas, 78%. Iowa, 77%. Wisconsin, 75%. Missouri, 56%. So, and again, Illinois looking pretty good with only 12%. But I think we're right in between major sources of information. We had the August 1st conditions reported in the timber crop production and WASDE report. We'll have conditions reported in the September 12th crop production and WASDE report. And so we wonder, when will these markets reflect or not what has happened in the last month in terms of crop conditions? Well, it will probably be around that WASI crop production report on September 12th as we either confirmation or not that there's been damage to the crop. And we wouldn't be the first group in a year to become very concerned about what heat has done to crops. And I think that there's kind of a wait and see attitude that you need to take. Although the drought monitors have in the past stated for some of these states that conditions look pretty dire, still drought monitors are measuring soil moisture in the profile down to the rooting depth. But you can do well crop-wise if you continue to have timely rain. That's, I think, and keep the topsoil moist. And I think that's the issue that got so much people's attention so much with regard to this heat, and that we haven't been getting moisture. Sort of our game plan for beating drier subsoil is being challenged in a big way in these areas. And so parts of south central Kansas, our extension agents are talking about soybeans being in tough enough shape that farmers are baling the plant material up to bale it, again, to sell it, to get something off of it. So you've got issues like that in parts of Kansas that we're awfully concerned about at a local level, and we're not alone. Again, you've got these other states that are also showing major problems in some of the very important crop production regions.
Dan, I appreciate you joining us once again this week to give us an update on the grain market.
Very good. Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show with a conversation about feeding sows to meet their nutrient requirements. And then for that conversation, we have K-State Swine Extension Specialist Joel DeRouchey. Joel, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate the opportunity to visit about feeding sows and for our swine producers out there. And again, this will be regardless of size for some of our larger producers, or if a producer just has a couple sows, we'll make sure that we visit and relate things to all the sizes. And so really the first area we want to kind of visit about is if we kind of break the different production segments apart, let's talk about gestating sows first. So again, our goal during gestation of sows, just like any livestock species, is really to set them up and prepare them the best possible for when they actually have their litter of pigs and for lactation. And so in order to do that during gestation, what we want to do is make sure that we're limit feeding those sows basically to their body maintenance, as well as what's needed for the developing fetuses in their reproductive tract. So oftentimes sows are fed somewhere between 4 and 4.5 pounds a day during gestation in order to maintain their body maintenance needs and that growth needed for the reproduction aspect. So there's different ways that we feed sows, and again, everybody might be set up a little differently. We certainly have a number of sows that are fed individually, and in those cases, it's pretty easy to deliver the targeted amounts of feed that sow is needing based on the diet nutrient content and then the weight or age of the sow. Just like, again, in other species, some of our older sows are a little bit bigger in body weight, so they need a little bit more feed just for their body maintenance. And so, again, we can adjust the amount of feed per day based on that. The other side is if we have some sows or gilts that are really thin or they're not to a normal body condition, we can individually feed those females more feed to get them to a moderate body condition, so it's more appropriate from after when they have their litter and start lactation. Because we know if a sow is very thin and tries to lactate, she's just going to continue to peel body reserves and be actually thinner at the end of lactation. The other side is if we overfeed sows or give them too much feed, they're just simply going to get fat. And we all recognize, again, as we relate all livestock species, and this is particularly true in swine, that sows that are over-conditioned, once they have their litter come lactation, they're going to eat less, they're going to milk less, and actually have poor reproductive performance in the future. So our goal is to have this moderate condition sow, and there's at K-State we have resources to help judge what that looks like. We can use back fat measurements. We can do some visual observation. So there's ways that we can help with that if you would like some help. But again, our goal is to get them set up. The other side is a number of producers have sows in group housing. And this is for a lot of our larger new sow units. They actually feed the sows together in pens versus individually. And certainly that's the case for a number of our smaller producers that have all their sows maybe in one group together. And so here we're feeding to an average. And so we have to watch so we're not creating fat or thin sows in those cases. But also we want to make sure that the facility is set up well, that we're not wasting a lot of feed, because oftentimes that feed goes onto a concrete floor. And thus we want to make sure that those sows are cleaning that feed up and not wasting a lot, because one, feed's very expensive, so we don't want to waste an expensive resource. But also, if they're wasting feed, they're not getting the targeted amount we want per day, so they can actually get thinner over the gestation period if it's in a situation where they're wasting feed.
Then when do producers need to start feeding that gestational diet?
So oftentimes producers will transition to the gestation diet right after they wean the sow. So after a sow goes through lactation and then we wean the litter from her, we start that gestation diet immediately after that, and we'll talk about lactation next, but a lactation diet's much higher in nutrients. And once that sow's weaned, we do not need to provide her as much nutrients because she's no longer in the milk production business. And so what we really want to do as well as you bring up when we start feeding that is once sows are weaned, they generally come into heat or an estrus to get rebred 3 to 5 days after they're weaned. And so during that time from weaning until then, we want to make sure that we feed them, 5 to 6 pounds of feed to make sure that we're continuing to get their body in their reproductive tract, in their physiology ready to be rebred so they have a large litter on the subsequent litter the next time.
And with the circle of livestock care, as most times, after gestation comes lactation.
Yeah, and so really the body needs, and this again, I always like to relate. I'm a livestock guy. I grew up and help with a lot of livestock species, and we all recognize that once we go to lactation, the nutrient needs of that female increase dramatically for milk production. And so in pigs, it's particularly the case where, in fact, if you do pound for pound body weight, the current modern sows will produce more milk than a Holstein cow on a body weight basis. So their demands are very high for milk production for their litter. And so what we do is we formulate those diets with more amino acids or more protein, as well as more energy. And sometimes producers use some added liquid fat to actually provide more energy directly. And so what we find is generally when we move a sow into the farrowing facility, she'll generally get limit fed somewhere between 4.5 to 6 pounds per day until she farrows. And then after she has her litter, we want that sow to go up on full feed as much as she will eat every day until we wean her. And again, weaning age ranges anywhere, kind of in Kansas, probably the youngest still is about 18 days, and the oldest will go up to, 28, 30 days for some operations. And so we just want her to maximize her feed intake so she holds her body condition, so she's not pulling off her own muscle to produce milk. So again, there's different ways that we feed sows during lactation. Some producers will hand feed with a scoop and provide 3 to 4 pounds at a time and feed multiple times a day. Some producers have installed automatic feeders where that sow either has a tube or the feeder itself is set up where she can just continually eat as much as she wants all day. Really, the process doesn't matter as much as we're just maximizing her intake, because a lot of lactating sows will consume somewhere between 12 to 16 pounds per day. And again, that's in contrast. In gestation, we were limiting those sows to 4.5 pounds. So it's over 3 times the amount of feed in lactation she'll eat on a daily basis to support her body needs.
And how do producers go about making that ration formulated correctly?
Certainly here at K-State, we have a large number of swine nutritionists, and we help many producers in Kansas with their formulation, and then they work with their feed company. There's There's also a number of very good toll mills, nutrition companies in Kansas that some producers work with directly. But certainly here at K-State, we work with a large number of producers. We have some base diets in place, and we can certainly help any producer with that, and we do on a continuous basis. Not only producers we work with for several decades, but each year there's new producers that we may haven't helped before, or new producers that just got into the swine industry. And not only nutrition, but management, health, all areas we can help those operations so that they're successful in raising swine.
Joel, with our current heat, it's pretty toasty outside, so isn't it important that producers take the time to cool down their swine before feeding them?
The heat wave that we're currently experiencing is very challenging right now, and especially for sows in lactation. So in gestation, again, they will still consume their feed because, again, they're on a limit-fed basis. In lactation, it's not uncommon that on these hot days, if a sow normally in a thermal neutral environment would eat 12 to 15 pounds, she may eat 3, 4, 5 pounds less per day if she's not in the right environment. And so it's very hard because these enclosed buildings, while we're pulling a lot of ventilation air, they still get very hot. And so there's ways to help mitigate that. Is a number of producers will use some water drippers so that they would turn on many times a day and just drip some water really over the top and the shoulder area of sows. If you don't have that installed, simply taking water and doing that several times a day is highly recommended, that we can keep those sows cool. Some other producers have got inventive. They'll basically take like a plastic tote, put a needle hole in it, fill it with water, and then it'll drip very slowly during the day right above the sows, so they don't have an infrastructure cost, but it's still a way to get some cool water on those sows because, again, it will affect their feed intake, which will decrease their milk production, which will also hurt them on the next reproductive cycle as well.
Once again, when it's really hot, making sure that your sows are getting high-quality food and not spoiled food.
Yeah, because one of the things when it's really hot, a lot of feed is stored outside in bulk bins. While some producers have bag feed, most sow feed is going to be in bulk bins, and that's exposed to the direct sunlight. So really what our goals here is not to overfill those. If it takes a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks to feed that feed is going to be as hot as it is outside, if not hotter, inside that bulk bin. So what we want to make sure that we can do is not overfill during these really hot times if you're a smaller producer, that feed stays fresh, or if any way that we can provide any shade or where we store that feed is really important. So also during this time of year, it's maybe not untypical that sometimes a mold inhibitor or other preservative could be added. Again, if that feed is going to be made and stored for 3-4 weeks at a time during the hot summer months. Now, some of our larger producers, they're going to go through that feed in a matter of 4 or 5 days. In those cases, that feed's going to stay fresh. It's more of a concern once we have to store it, even a month or more, how we make sure it's still high quality for those sows.
That was K-State Swine Extension Specialist Joel DeRouchey. I will link the resources that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update. And as always, we're joined with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Big point this past week, it's been really hot.
It has been very, very warm. We've been lucky. We sit back and look at summer thus far. And yeah, we had a period of warmth at the end of July, but this is definitely putting the stamp on the summer, unfortunately. And we've had about 6 days now of 100-degree plus heat, and it's been relenting. Every day we're getting up to over 100 degrees. We've got, I could count the clouds I've seen in the sky over the last week, and there's just been very little cloud cover, abundant sunshine, and at times breezy winds. Record-wise, a lot of folks have been asking about, how does this compare to our streaks? And we look back, it's not abnormal to get 5-6 days of 100-degree heat. It's been a while. We had a string of that, depending on your location. But in central Kansas, I'll use that as kind of a focal point. We had 5 days of 100-degree heat last year in July. But before that, we hadn't had that since 2012. So it can happen quite often when we look back in history, and this doesn't really even rank in the top 30 of warmest streaks in Kansas history by any means. We have had some days where we had exceptional temperatures, mostly kind of spearheaded by Saturday, where we had temperatures over 110 for a lot of places in the state. It was easy pickings for some of those records, and we had records set. Otherwise, highs, we haven't really set a whole lot of records. It's been the overnight lows in areas of central and eastern Kansas. We've set some overnight warm lows, so we're just not cooling off very much at night.
And that not cooling off part, seeing a big impact then on crops.
Yeah, the not cooling off part factors a little bit in with the moisture. We have a lot of moisture in the air, especially in eastern Kansas. We have dew points 70 plus that yields humidities in the 60 to 70% range in the daytime, then up to 100% at night. And so those temperatures can't drop. If that dew point is 70-something, 75, the temperature can't physically drop below that. So it keeps us warmer at night when we have those higher humidities. Further west, we've had dew points much lower in the 40s. So they've gotten down into the 50s at night, and they're really recovering nicely. But that takes stress off crops when they get down that cool. Whereas overnight lows in the 70s and 80s, big animal comfort stress, as well as vegetation stress, just because the crops can't recover and breathe.
And previously, we had been seeing a fair amount of moisture, but not this week.
Yeah, this week we have had absolutely no moisture. I think there's one little bullseye there in McPherson County that got one brief storm for about 20 minutes. Other than that, there's not been a drop of rain in the state over the last 7 days. So 0% of normal precipitation statewide. Not a good time to over-rely it with the 100-degree heat. But if we had precipitation, we wouldn't be in the hundreds.
Do we have hope of seeing precipitation as we move forward?
Yeah, so we've had influences from two tropical systems. We had Hillary that was in the southwest, went up way north of us, but is bringing a cold front southward that's going to reach the state later today on Friday. And that cold front's not going to have any moisture. It's going to stall out briefly on Saturday. And then the moisture from Harold, another tropical storm, this time in the Gulf, has already been transported west and is going up the Rockies right now. And that moisture is going to transition east along that stalled front on Saturday night. And so we could see some precipitation, mostly for the northern half of the state, I think, with some isolated areas of probably an inch or more, which would be our average weekly precipitation. So that'll be our one chance of moisture. It looks like after that, high pressure's trying to build back in next week. It will be cool to start the week and cool over the weekend, especially relative to 100 degrees. And then we'll start warming back up later next week. And with a dry forecast, we might not be done with the heat, unfortunately.
And as we look even further ahead, kind of into how we are ending August and starting into September, what are we seeing there?
Yeah, so I think we're not done with the heat. And we'll see warmer temperatures on average for the whole month probably. And I think below normal precipitation is likely. Although as we get later in the month, we might have a slight chance for above normal precipitation just as the overall jet stream begins to shift down. So warmer and kind of equal chances trending to drier than normal for September.
Chip, I appreciate you coming on and giving us our weather update for the week.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.